On the line here we have Mark Sheilds, former Commissioner of Police. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, sir. I'm really glad that you decided that you do this interview. Now,
it's my pleasure.
We understand what is going on in the country. The first question I want to ask you, what is it that you feel is the biggest hindrance to the movement of the police and the government against crime in Jamaica?
Hey, Wagwan, my people. I hope you all are doing good. Hope you all are doing great. So we come across another Mutabaruka content wherein Mutabaruka is interviewing Mark Sheilds. So before we start this interview, don't forget it is Black Unity. So don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you're new to this channel, guys. Blessings as always, and yeah. So we are gonna go ahead and proceed.
Mutabaruka, we want to present to you a wholesome kind of level of consciousness right now. So subscribe and tell your friend them. This is Mutabaruka. On the line here we have Mark Sheilds, former Commissioner of Police. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, sir. I'm really glad that you decided that you do this interview. Now,
it's my pleasure.
We understand what is going on in the country. The first question I want to ask you, what is it that you feel is the biggest hindrance to the movement of the police and the government against crime in Jamaica?
The biggest hindrance?
Yes.
Well, you know what, man? You could speak and write for hours on that, because it really is a thing that you need to break down into sections. And the hindrance takes all shapes and forms. I think first and foremost, the Jamaican Constabulary Force themselves, they have a few very good people, very professional, very dedicated to what they do, but they still have an internal problem of corruption, point one, and point two, there is still a critical mass of people within the organisation who do not wish to change, who police as if it's still 1970 or 1980, and despite giving every single aid, assurance, assistance, we're still stuck where we were before. And I've noticed that on some different levels, which I could expand on. Secondly, the government, at the moment, I think there is a new will to make things happen. Whether or not the zones of special operation work, we will have to see. The state of emergency in St. James is another positive move, although it is perhaps disappointing that it didn't happen 2 years ago. So there are things that are beginning to happen. If you look at the murder rate in St. James since the state of emergency, without trying to put anything on it, it has certainly reduced. And now we have to look at ways in which we can continue to chase those criminals off the streets, not just from St. James, but everywhere else. And you'll find that criminals that were in St. James are now being displaced to Hanover, Westmoreland and Clarendon and elsewhere. So we need to keep them in fear of us, rather than the public, the people of Jamaica, the good people of Jamaica being in fear of the criminals. And I think we can do that. So in answer to your question, it's very broad. We also have to look at ourselves. We have to look at our own behaviour. You and I both drive on the streets of Jamaica and we see the recklessness. We see the lawlessness all the time. People jumping red lights, going the wrong way up roads, doing everything that they can not to obey the law. And we somehow have to create a society like it is in other places where people do as they're told, people obey laws, because my strong belief is that if you can take control of the streets and have some sense of order, then there's less likelihood to be the serious lawlessness that we see in places in Jamaica.
The reoccurring argument about corruption in the police force. Remember Dr. Carl Williams mentioned his disappointment in not being able to curb that. We just spoke to a former assistant commissioner, Trinity Keith Gardner, about, and he mentioned the corruption. And now we hear you hint at it too. It would appear to me that it has been there forever. When you were when you was the commissioner of police, was it dear to the point where now that we hear everybody talking about it, or is just something just starting to happen now? Because we hear a lot of police getting old for different...
I don't think there was sufficient, and it's with respect to all of my colleagues, I do not think that there was sufficient will and courage to move against some of these corrupt individuals. But in defence of them, I do not think that the way that the rules within the Jamaican Constabulary Act are set up, that it's very easy to get rid of people. What I can tell you is that when I was Deputy Commissioner of Police, I saw the intelligence. I read about some of the extremely bad cops that were within the organisation that I actually had to work with. But the problem that you have is moving from having the intelligence to constructing a proper investigation, prosecution, and subsequent conviction is a huge amount of work. And quite often these people are very sophisticated and extremely difficult to catch. So I would prefer a system whereby if we have the intelligence, that the government and legislators would allow us to have a system whereby we could retire people in the public interest. Because sometimes I'd rather just not have them in the force and even pay some money, but get rid of them, clean up the force, because in that way we can move forward. Whilst they stay, we have no chance of actually securing the trust and confidence of the people.
All right, we say that indecom is coming under fire by the two main, the opposition leader and the Prime Minister. What do you think is the role of indecom in all of this, given that they were there to really deal with certain human rights against the citizens by the police? But now we see that they are also coming under fire by the two main gentlemen them in Jamaica.
Well, first of all, you and I were talking about corruption, and if we just stick with corruption for a minute, we've now got MOCA, the Major Organised Crime and Anti-Corruption Agency, which, as you know, Parliament has just passed that it will be a completely separate, independent organisation to the police, to the Jamaican Constabulary Force, and they will be targeting corruption, which is what you and I were talking about.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, and I think that's an extremely positive move that this government has managed to get that legislation through. In relation to indecom itself, I do not understand the concerns about whether it's politicians or certain police officers. I do not understand it. There is there is legislation in place for indecom, and there are rules upon which they can be engaged. In fact, if you look at the front page of the Gleaner today, and I think the Observer, where the Honourable Peter Phillips, the opposition leader, said that indecom were taking guns off police officers on the street just after shootings, you also saw that Terence Williams said that's absolutely not the case, that there is a procedure, that indecom themselves don't take weapons from police anyway, it's the police that do that, and secondly, they're taken to a police station where it is done discreetly. So there can be this misinformation from various quarters at times, which I think is unhelpful. The reality is that every single civilized country has an organisation like indecom that is there to independently investigate the police. That's what you have. And we need to face the fact that indecom is not going to go away, that the law is there, and it's there to protect the civilians, and it's also there to protect the innocent police officers, because I think it was Minister Montague who said just a few days ago, of all of those investigations conducted by indecom, a very small percentage actually ended up with prosecutions. But you still have to go through the process of investigation, because if you don't have investigation, then you can get miscarriages of justice.
So what do you think is the Prime Minister mentioned balance. What is your interpretation of the Prime Minister talking about the need some balance in indecom?
I didn't hear exactly what the Prime Minister said, but my view on balance is very simply this. Indecom are bound by certain rules and regulations that are set down in law in terms of how they can proceed. I do not have any knowledge or evidence of indecom breaking that breach or breaching that in any shape or form. If they have, then those matters would be investigated. I do not think that it's on one side or the other. I just think that there is a general resistance, that this attitude that some police officers are literally laying down their weapons because they're concerned about indecom. I would say, police officer, you have nothing to be frightened of. If you do your job and you use sufficient force that is relevant to that particular occasion, and if you defend yourself and you defend your citizens, then you have no fear from anybody at all. But on the other hand, if you think that you can go out there and target people who you think are criminals and kill them and plant firearms on them, I have absolutely no sympathy for you at all. That's how I would say it.
If you were the commissioner of police today, what would
Deputy Commissioner, yes.
No, today. If you were the commissioner of police today,
yes.
What would be your first move now, given the situation that we find ourselves in Jamaica?
Well, there's quite a few things I would do if I was Commissioner of Police, but I think the first thing I would do immediately is to look at the strength of the Jamaican Constabulary Force, and I would get anybody at all that was behind a desk, that was fit to be on the streets, and I would get as many people on the streets as possible. Everything that's happening in St James that is successful at the moment, and the things that have happened that are successful in the zones of special operations, is because there is high visibility policing,
yes,
and there's a presence of soldiers. So the first thing I would do is to review the strength of the Jamaican Constabulary Force, and I would order every single person who sits behind a desk conducting an administrative role to get on the streets and to be visible. I don't care if they're not the greatest police officers in the world, but I need them on the streets. I need to ensure that when you and I drive home and we go through, say, Halfway Tree, that we're not going to jump the lights, we're not going to cut up the right-hand lane, we're not going to do all those other bad things, because there's going to be a police officer everywhere to control the streets. We need to take control of the streets. We need to make citizens feel safe and secure. That's the first thing that I would do. Secondly, I would have absolute zero tolerance to anything to do with traffic infractions, people dropping garbage on the streets, men urinating on fences at the side of the streets, any of those small crimes that are being committed that everyone turns a blind eye to. Motorcyclists riding without crash helmets, you name it. If you're on the streets and you commit an offence, you will get a ticket or you will be arrested. So that would be my second thing. And the third thing is that I would establish permanent checkpoints, police checkpoints around major cities, with proper concrete structures, with CCTV, with license plate reading systems upon them, so that criminals fear going to any city because they know they're going to be watched. So they're just 3 or 4 things. I could go on if you have more time.
Yeah. No, we have time. You can't talk. We have time.
Well, next, if you really want to know, in the first month, I would interview every single senior officer in the force, and I would decide for myself, based on the intelligence and based on my interview, whether or not I think they are fit for purpose. And I would make some tough decisions, and I would focus on building a strong, trustworthy, reliable top team. And I would get rid of anyone that I did not feel would fit that bill, and I would either give them a project to do, or if I could, get rid of them in the public interest. I would then, with that, identify the top 10 high potential officers, and I would ensure that they go off to Canada, the United Kingdom and the United States for extended periods of secondment in order that they could learn the strategic skills that are required to run a modern police service.
Yeah.
And I would bring them back and hope that at least 1 or 2 of them would be the natural successors to be the next internal commissioner of police.
All right, we have a fork in the road here, and given where we are now, I mean, take yourself out of it as being a commissioner. We need a commissioner now. You give credence to the idea that we should seek for the commissioner outside of Jamaica?
Well, no, there's a big difference. Outside Jamaica or outside the Jamaican Constabulary Force, which are you talking about?
Outside of Jamaica. If you could, like, you came here, and you had Mr. Green from England who was here a couple of years ago. You think that Jamaica right now reach a stage now where we need to get someone more experience, more understanding of crime fighting in a volatile situation? Like, for instance, England. Can remember that them did the ban handgun in England?
Yes.
Yeah. But now we see people are use knife killing. Every day when I'm a brethren call me and say, "Why appear knife killing are going on in England?" But I think we can handle knife quicker than gun. But
it does.
Yeah, you think it is necessary, or you give credence to the idea that why Jamaica, it look like every time we get a commissioner like not working, we need to get somebody outside. What do you think about
well,
that?
let me put it this way. I'm going to give you an analogy with Grace Kennedy. Grace Kennedy is a well-respected Jamaica-grown company. Okay? You accept that?
Yes.
Grace Kennedy is a well-respected company. Grace Kennedy has grown exponentially over the years to become an internationally recognized company, and they export their goods to the United Kingdom and the United States. And they also have a lot of services. Now, you're going to be thinking, where's Mark Shields going with this? This is where I'm going with it. The reason for the success of Grace Kennedy is because they have been able to recruit people from outside Grace Kennedy. If everybody joined Grace Kennedy at 18, 19, 20 years old, and the only way you could be in Grace Kennedy is if you started on the shop floor and worked your way up to become the CEO, I can guarantee that Grace Kennedy would not be the great company it is. Like any company that is successful, it draws on people from other areas, whether they're Jamaican from within Jamaica or whether they're from outside that country. That's why Digicel is successful. That's why Grace Kennedy and many other companies are successful because of that. If you have an organisation like the JCF that only ever recruits people from within inside the JCF, it is a recipe for disaster. I regret that after Les Green left and after I left, that for whatever reason, they stopped the whole notion of international police officers. They stopped so many things. They stopped the Major Investigation Task Force. They have not done as much with intelligence. There are so many things that we actually start here that are quite good, and then after a couple of years, we give it up. So the answer to your question is yes, I would take not only a commissioner, but deputy commissioners and assistant commissioners from elsewhere. But at the same time, as I said in my plan, I would be training local Jamaican senior officers to go and work abroad to gain the experience. In the same way that if you work for Grace Kennedy, you can leave and go and work in New York or Miami for a few years and then come back with all that experience back to Grace Kennedy and make the organisation great. So that's my analogy. I don't know what you think about that idea.
I think it's important. I had a suggestion, and I suggested continuously in this program that the Ministry of Security and should really send or carry a group of police, soldiers, whatsoever, and carry them to countries that has had worse crime than Jamaica and has gotten out of it. You know, there are many countries. I mean, all right, even think about New York itself. There was that time when people afraid for what in New York City with almost 10 million people. And we see right now, 300 murder for 1 year is like for 10 million people. That is really something else.
Yeah, exactly.
And I am feeling that what should take place is that countries that we see that had a high crime rate, for whatever reason or not, these are the countries that these police, soldiers, and the military should go to and really get a good hands-on understanding of what is it that was done to alleviate that problem and carry it back to Jamaica. I don't know. I mean,
and it isn't, but you know what? It's not just about the crime fighting side, because you and I are talking mainly about crime fighting, but it's actually about going to NYPD or the Met Police in London and looking at how they run the organisation. How do you make strategic plans and how do you make strategic decisions? Yeah. How do you manage a large public sector organisation? Because all of that's very important as well. And when you look at the Jamaican Constabulary Force and the way it's managed, it hasn't changed for so many years. And it's those things. And so if you can't bring people in all of the time because the local force is not prepared to listen or think they know best, then send them away. Send them to New York, Toronto and London in order that they can gather those excellent skills and bring them back and preach to the people here for them.
Well, Mr. Sheilds, I give thanks for you talking to me, and I realize that you decide that this is your home now, and you're quite okay, and so I really say that it don't jolt you a bit, like you want to run with like some away. So, yeah, man, give thanks.
Thank you, man. Thank you for inviting me onto your show. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, that was Mark Shields, former Commissioner of Police, giving his view.
So, yeah, man, as it is, guys, that was the end of the interview of Mr. Mark Shields. I hope you guys did learn something. And yeah, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to this channel, guys. Bless up as always. Adios.